spring right before opener. Like we'll do kind of the same thing we're doing now, but we do it in April or May. Yeah.
Check.
All right, my wife just asked me if anybody came tonight, so I have to take a picture. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hopefully a couple people flipped her off. That'd be funny.
We can take another one. Have everybody flip her off.
Cool. All right, make sure that's all off.
Should we get started? All right. Thanks everyone for coming. This is a great turnout, of course. If anybody else comes in, I don't know. Looks like one chair there. A couple. We can squeeze some people in if we need to. But my name is Pat. I'm the owner. Or my wife and I own DNS here. And yeah, we're happy to do these seminars. It's something Gene did for many years. Happy to keep that tradition going. We have a great speaker tonight. Noah Humfeld wears many hats. He is
just one.
Well,
it's not even yours. I grabbed the wrong hat.
I know. Yeah.
Damn it.
No, he is a very popular local guide. Recently, a new father. Recently acquired his captain's license, so he can guide out on Lake Michigan, and so that's exciting. He's also the star and host of the hit YouTube series Shop Talk, which he's done quite a few of those here, and those are a lot of fun, and I'm sure we'll be doing more of those this winter. He's going to be talking about toothy critters on the Madison chain, and
including the crackheads on John Nolan. So
there you go. We will be having one more time.
Snaggletooth.
If you haven't filled out a little blue ticket, we're giving a couple prizes away, door prizes at the end of the night. We do have all Beaver Dam and Finicky Fooler products, 10% off tonight, which is, that doesn't happen every day. So if you want to take advantage, please feel free. And if anybody knows how we can get some colder weather, that would be great, because we could use some ice here pretty quick.
I literally put my boat away today. I made one last run up to the Dells today, and I was like, I'm a pansy. I don't like my boat getting all salty and stuff, and I also don't have a good way to wash it off where I store it. So now I'm kind of thinking that was a stupid thing to do.
Well, let's hope not. Let's hope we get
hopefully
some ice.
Not, but
temp drop soon. Anyway,
we'll
big round of applause for Noah. Thanks for coming.
So when I got here tonight, I had no idea there was a toilet back here, and I really thought about just sitting on the toilet and just sitting here and staring at everybody for an hour just to see how things went. And apparently it doesn't work, so Pat talked me out of it. So thank you for that wonderful introduction, Pat. That was way nicer than it needed to be. Hi, I'm Noah. I go fishing a lot. I grew up in Monona. I've been fishing the Madison chain pretty much my whole life. Ran away to college for 5 years, got a degree I am not using whatsoever, and now I go fishing for a job because I made a lot of bad life choices. So, tonight we are going to be talking about toothy things here in Madison. A lot of the stuff we're going to cover tonight is stuff that works just about everywhere, but these are things that I've kind of over the years sort of dialed in specifically for the Madison chain here. And this is stuff that works on the entire chain. So how many people fish Madison on a regular basis? Quite a few people. All right. So then you kind of know each lake kind of has its own nuances, right? Like they're all pretty different. For a chain of lakes that are all connected, they fish somewhat similar, but they do fish differently. So we can kind of go into some specifics with each lake and stuff. And if you guys have questions as I go, please shout them out. If you've ever been to any of my talks before, I'm super informal with that kind of stuff. So shout them out. Okay. I hate hearing myself talk, so here we go. And that was a beautiful fish caught on Lake Mendota, my first time out last winter, early ice, and I think that was one of I think we caught 42 fish that night over off of Govs. It was ridiculous, and we were the only people out there. It was freaking ridiculous. That was the big one. They weren't all that big, so I had to put the big one in here. Alrighty, and another thing before I get into this, everything that I'm sharing with you guys is my opinion. It's stuff that works for me. It is not the end-all, be-all. It has to be this way. it's fishing, right? There's no rules other than it's really hard to catch them unless your bait's in the water. So I don't want to pound anything into your head like it has to be this way, right? Like this is just stuff that works for me, and there's obviously lots of ways to do the same stuff we're going to talk about. So the first thing I want to throw out there, regardless of whether it's pike, walleye, really anything, is don't overthink what you're doing. And I think a lot of people get really hung up, especially walleye fishing, with color and size and leader material and all this stuff. Fish are pretty stupid, right? Their brains are pretty tiny, and we're trying to outthink something that barely has a thought, right? And I think we give them way too much credit, especially muskies, but we're not talking about muskies tonight. I hate muskies so much. So I do think we get way too hung up on little details. Do they make a difference? Sometimes they do, right? But overall, don't get super hung up on that stuff. In fact, I usually pack very, very light when I go fishing. And oh good, my buddy Adam's here. There's a lot of people here that I recognize tonight, and this is horrifying. So, hi Adam. So anyway, I usually pack very light. I bring a very limited amount of gear with me, so that way I have less options, and I'm not spending as much time screwing around trying different stuff and second guessing myself. I have to commit to what I have and make it work. So that being said, I still bring way too much stuff, but I do have a pretty slimmed down approach to a lot of the stuff that I use. All right, little housekeeping before we start talking about the fun stuff. I'm sure some of you saw that Mendota is going to a 10-fish panfish limit starting, I believe, in April of this coming year, 2024. There's a handful of reasons for that, but one of them is barotrauma. So obviously, perch fishing, right? You're jerking them out of super deep water. They don't all survive. Same thing happens with walleye. Same thing happens with pike, bass. Basically anything that can't regulate a swim bladder. The only things that really can are trout and whitefish and Cisco's tullibees, things like that. So basically anything we have here in Madison is susceptible to barotrauma. So for me personally, I have a 30-foot maximum that I fish. Like I only will have a bait 30 feet down, and that's even pushing it a little bit. I've been kind of stepping back and going to about 20, 25 feet for the most part as far as how far down my bait is. And if I know I don't have a very big fish hooked, I take my time bringing it up, give them a chance to kind of decompress as they come up. One other thing too, as I'm drinking a soda, completely unrelated to barotrauma, but sometimes you get a fish that's hooked pretty crappy and they're bleeding, right? And you've probably seen people pour soda down their throat. Don't do that. That's really bad for them. Does the bleeding stop? Yes, but you're also pouring citric acid in their lungs. Don't do that. That doesn't help. The best thing you can do is put them back in the water. Fish blood clots in water. That's kind of how they're designed. And put them back in the water as quick as you can. If it is bleeding really bad, Gatorade works pretty well. And basically you're playing with sugar and salt and you're trying to osmoregulate and some goofy stuff that we're not going to get into that I learned in a past life in a degree that I don't use anymore. And basically, don't pour soda down their throat if they're hooked really bad, or beer. Don't do that. I've seen that happen. And one other thing too, obviously for sure, whatever, blah, 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 get them back real quick, let them go. This crazy thing happens when you let fish go. They get bigger. It's pretty sweet. Any questions on any of that stuff? No? Good. Okay, we'll stop talking about sad things. All right, walleyes. That's that fish from the first slide. Super fun. And you might notice in the background next to its tail, there's a little flag. These things are super cool if you've never used one of these before. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. All right, probably the number one question I get asked about ice fishing for walleyes is where can I consistently catch them? They have fins, they have tails, they have eyeballs, they have metabolisms, and they like to use all of those things. They move around a lot. And it does seem like there are kind of two different types of fish in Madison, and not just Madison, but all over the place. Fish that hang out in open water, pelagic fish that just roam around and do their thing, which are quite a bit more difficult to target, especially around here. If you're not using some kind of forward-facing sonar type technology, very difficult to kind of nail down where those fish are. One way you can find them is usually perch. If you can find a big school of perch out in open water, there's going to be predators with them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then there's also obviously fish that hang on structure or close to structure. Usually they'll use the structure to feed, and then they'll slide off it when they're not feeding. So usually there are structure-oriented fish and open water fish. Obviously the structure fish are easier to find. And obviously the time of year, environmental conditions, there's all kinds of different things that'll dictate where these fish go. Weeds, we'll talk about weeds here in a little bit. The time of year and the kind of weeds that you're encountering can make a big difference too. Usually late ice, depending on a lot of other things, snow cover, water clarity, things like that, that can dictate what kind of condition the weeds are in throughout the winter, and that can have an effect on where these fish are hanging out as well. I know some of you are like, dude, just tell me where to go. So walleye spots continued. So some of the more fail-safe spots are things that just kind of make sense, right? So usually steep drop-offs, outside weed edges, hard to soft bottom transitions, basically all the places you would fish for them open water. But I think there is one thing that a lot of people screw up, especially early ice, is a lot of people fish way too deep. Are there fish out deep? Yes, there's always fish out deep. However, I have found that early, at least for the first, 4 to 6 weeks of ice or so, I do a lot better in basically 15 feet or less, generally speaking. Why is that the case? I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. Can you catch them right away, early ice out deep? Yes. I usually find a lot more fish in shallow though. So it kind of depends what you're trying to do. If you want to catch numbers, usually shallow is the way to go. If you're looking for giants, you can still catch them up shallow, but a lot of times those ones are the ones that are out a little bit deeper, a little bit trickier to find. Any questions on spots? Nothing? Really? Like nobody's going to ask me my favorite walleye spot. Yeah.
So you said for the first month you fish,
Yes.
8 to 15 feet.
Yes.
In early ice.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And again, is that like a rule you have to be? No. But I like to stay relatively shallow. It just seems like there's a lot of fish. Like right now, if we were going to go out walleye fishing, like literally right now, I'd be fishing in that same depth or less, even up into 2-3 feet of water. Yes.
Are you fishing at the edge of the weed line, in the weed line at that depth?
That's a really good question. So usually on the outside weed edge, for the most part, is where I'm fishing just because it's a lot easier to keep your baits clean versus being up in the weeds. However, I will fish up in the weeds if the weeds are fishable, if that makes sense. So if they're really tall, hard to keep a bait clean weeds, I won't mess with them. I'll get on the outside. But if there's kind of sparse weed growth and I can get a bait within a couple feet of the bottom, I'll fish in the weeds.
No, do they go into the weeds at nighttime?
Yes. Yep, absolutely. And the daytime too. But yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure someone's going to get pissed that I'm going to say this out loud, but it's not really a secret. The north end of Wabisa out of Lake Farm, that big shallow weed flat, there's walleyes up in there right now, and they'll be there for a while. Usually that's a really great early ice spot. And we're talking 3 to 6 feet of water and pretty solid weeds, and they'll be loaded up in there pretty hot and heavy. Part of the issue, obviously, is actually being able to, A, present a bait clean, and B, get a fish through the weeds without losing them. So I typically kind of avoid the heavy weed stuff, but they will absolutely move into the weeds at night. Yep, and that's another interesting thing about the weed stuff, which we'll touch on later, but weeds do really weird things under the ice. Obviously, they're plants, right? They give off oxygen. That's only when they're performing photosynthesis, which only happens when there's sunlight. There are instances where they will go into aerobic respiration. They'll actually pull oxygen from the water at night. So as things go on in the winter and the oxygen levels change under the ice, weeds can actually hurt you later on, especially when the weeds really start to die off and decompose and you have all the bacteria and stuff breaking all that stuff down, also sucking oxygen. So early ice, weeds are a good place to be. As we move on, weeds kind of get a little mucky unless you find good green weeds. So that's a way overly complicated answer to your question. Yes, they will move into the weeds at night. Any other questions on that? Yes?
When do weeds die?
That's a great question. So I don't have any specific way to say they die on this day or this week. The biggest thing is the environmental conditions. So on years where we have a heavy snowfall, a lot of overcast, a lot of low pressure systems, it seems like the weeds die off a little quicker. Less sunlight, they kind of get buried. And if you've ever, drilled a hole in the ice, I guess, and looked down it, obviously when there's a lot of snow cover, it's a little darker down there. When you have clear ice, you can see a lot further. Same thing happens with the weeds. If the light can't get through, the weeds die off. So it depends a lot on how much sunlight penetration you get through the ice. So it's kind of hard to say. And there's some weeds that stay green all winter long, Yes?
When you're talking about early ice for these more shallow spots,
Mm-hmm.
are you talking thickness of the ice or time of year?
Time of year.
Okay, so when would you say is the transition out of early ice?
That's a really good question. I would say, obviously it depends when we get ice. For me, it's usually about 2/3 of the way through January, towards the end of January. Yep. That's kind of what I'd consider to be the middle of winter. Yes?
With regard to Lake Farm, like you mentioned before with that weedy bay,
Yes.
the fact that the river runs, on the east side there,
Yep.
does that help the dying weed problem?
I
Oxygen problem?
I think it does, yeah, because you do have some moving water, so you are getting some kind of oxygenation happening. Yes, I do think that helps a lot. And current in general helps a lot too. Just you're pulling more nutrients into the system, more bait into the system. And by nature, walleyes are kind of like a river fish. They like current. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why that's a really productive area. And obviously you've got to be really, really careful when you're up there. There was somebody who went through last year who passed away because of, a lot of different things, but I think part of it could be the dredging. Some of the way the current kind of moves through there is different now. So if you do go out there, don't go out there at night unless you've on the north end of Lake Wabisa where the train trestle is. Yep. The current has kind of changed out there. So if you are venturing out there, go out there during the daytime and kind of check it out before you go out at night. Be very careful of that. Any other questions on spots? Nothing.
So where is your favorite spot?
Where's my favorite spot? Wherever the walleyes are. So there's definitely some fail-safe spots, and this is always the part where I shoot myself in the foot because I'm just like, this is where I fish. And honestly, I'm pretty open with info, so I don't really care. And none of the spots I fish are secrets. Probably my number one most consistent spot is Governor's Island on Mendota, for good reason, right? Because we've got all of these different components happening there. We've got hard to stop bottom transition. We have the deepest water in the lake right next to a giant drop off and a big rock flat with weeds. There's all kinds of really good structure there. So what's nice about that area is they have everything they need. They have deep open water, they have shallow structure and everything in between. So in a given day or evening or whenever you have to fish, you can figure out where those fish are pretty quickly because it's not a super big area and it's very dynamic. So it's pretty easy to dial in, especially if you're going in kind of blind. So that's one of them. Structure-wise, Second Point's another really good spot. Picnic Point, basically big main lake points, main lake structure. As far as mud fish go, fish that are just out in the abyss, I'm sure this is going to piss someone off in this room. The east side of Lake Monona can be really good. Kind of along, if you guys are familiar with Monona, Toniwatha, basically that entire shoreline out there. It's a nice rocky shoreline. There's usually a good weed edge on it, and then it drops off into the mud. It's a great perch spot as well. Anywhere you find perch, you're going to find walleyes, and usually not small ones. Yes, sir?
Can you point it out on the map for people?
Yes. Hey, there's a map. When did that happen? Sweet. Super cool. All right, so for the people who don't know what I'm talking about, where are we at here? Okay, good. Okay, just making sure. So obviously Governor's Island, Dunn's Bar, Maple Bluff. So where were you specifically wanting to look, Ken? Anywhere. Pick a spot.
The other area was on Wabisa, right?
Monona, yeah. Do we have a Monona map? Okay. Yeah. Mendota's pretty easy to figure out. Anything that looks good is. Monona's a little trickier. And I will say on average, if you're looking for really big fish, Mendota is not where I'm going. I'm typically going to Monona or Wabisa if I'm looking for a really big one. And don't bring up Kegonsa because I hate Kegonsa. We're not going to talk about Kegonsa. So I just hate it. So so kind of this east, I guess it would kind of be the southeast side of Lake Monona over here. You can see the break line there's all kinds of little points and stuff that kick out. So it's pretty dynamic. A lot of this is rocky shoreline. There's weeds on it, and then it just kind of dumps off into 50, 60 feet of water. And there's actually a really crappy little boat launch that's good enough for like one boat down here by Schluter Beach. That's actually one of my favorite spots to go out of, and I'll just walk straight out into the mud, just drill some holes, look for perch, and if I'm finding perch, there's usually a few big walleyes hanging out with them too. Where else on Monona? Basically anywhere, again, that looks good. One spot that I do think gets kind of overlooked is the north end of the lake up here. Again, you do need to be careful because we have Starkweather Creek coming in up here. There's current, you need to be careful. But we have all this beautiful access up here. Early ice, that whole north shoreline along Olbrich can be really good too. So this year, the weeds actually don't totally suck up there. I don't know if anyone else noticed this, particularly musky guys. The outside weed edge out there for the last 2 years has been like 5 feet of water. When I was a kid, it was like 15 feet of water, and then the weed line just kept receding. This year, it's back out in like 12, so we actually have some pretty solid weeds out there. The walleyes do load up on that weed edge, so that's another good early spot, and those fish will push up into those weeds too. In fact, probably a week ago, I was just casting off the breakwater there from shore, and I probably caught 15 fish in like 45 minutes or so. No big ones, but 15 to 20 inchers, just throwing jerk baits and stuff. Those fish don't leave. They have no reason to leave. There's all that bait there and cover. There's a little current coming in. They'll stay there for quite a while until something forces them out. So usually it's dying weeds or the bait fish move on or whatever. But that's another really... Tenney Park? Yeah. So Tenney, there's so many maps. Oh boy. Yeah, so Tenney is kind of an interesting spot. Obviously, we got the locks there. There's current moving through there. We need to be careful. But out in front of Tenney, and this map doesn't show it super great, but basically straight off the breakwater there, in about 12 to 18 feet, there's kind of this weird point that sticks out, and it's got a bunch of scattered rock on it and some weeds in it. That's another really good spot too. And just off of that, it kind of turns into a sort of muddy bottom as it kind of pushes out to Brearley Bar into that saddle right there. There are fish that hang out in this mud too, but a lot of those fish cycle in and out. At least that's what I've kind of noticed. They'll be kind of out in the abyss in the daytime, and a lot of times they'll push into that structure in the evening to feed. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't come into the structure during the daytime either, and that's one thing that I kind of want to drive home here is they are very catchable in the daytime. It's just finding the active fish during the daytime. So obviously, walleyes generally have kind of a crepuscular, that's the big word of the day, crepuscular. Basically means they're active at low light periods during the daytime, like deer, right? So they do have kind of a crepuscular nature, particularly on lakes. I think river fish are a little bit more active all the time because they're working harder, right? They got to swim and they got to eat. So it seems like our lake fish are a little bit lazier and they do like to feed in low light conditions. So daytime or nighttime for fishing for walleyes? Yes. If you have time to go, go. But things do change, and I do think daytime stealth does seem to make a little bit of a difference, so I'll kind of size down my leaders a little bit. Sometimes I'll even go down to like a 4 or 6 pound fluorocarbon leader just to be as stealthy as I can. But how stealthy can you be with a big chunk of plastic with treble hooks on it? So don't overthink it too much. But during the daytime, I do like to downsize my leaders. At nighttime, I'll beef them up a little bit. Obviously, going with a lighter leader, there's a greater chance you're going to get bit off by something else with teeth, which we're going to get to later. What's
your average pound test for a leader?
10. Yep, 10. 10 pound fluoro is pretty much perfect. It's thin enough that it's not super visible, but it's also heavy enough if you do hook something really big, you've got a good chance of getting it in. As long as you can tie knots well, you're good. So, like I just said, there's no wrong time to fish walleyes. But again, they do have these weird windows, and it does seem like the windows kind of get shorter as we get later and later and later into the winter. And they do change too. So how many people have fished at 2, 3, 4 a.m. and done pretty well? Fair number of people, yeah. Have you noticed something about fishing really early in the morning like that, if you have done that? So I'm probably going to get in trouble, but I'm not going to say where, but there's certain spots that it does seem like really early morning is when the big fish turn on. And that's not true for everything. You do have to pull some all-nighters to kind of figure some of that stuff out, which is a fun opportunity to do some ice camping with your friends. So just sitting out all night and making bad life choices and watching a bunch of tip-ups or jigging, it's pretty fun. It's good for you, especially in the middle of winter. It does seem like, and I've noticed this for the last probably 5 or 6 years now, that our big fish usually come really late at night or really early in the morning, which is kind of interesting. Now, there's no pattern to that. I have not found a discernible pattern to it's this time of winter and the moon's doing this and there's my left toe really hurts and whatever. It just is something I've kind of noticed looking back that there are some really big fish that for whatever reason turn on really late. So what I guess I'm saying is when you're picking up all your lines, take your time because you never know. And that takes a lot of time and screwing around to figure that out. Okay, so food. That's another really big one. What do I use on my tip downs, my tip ups, my autos, my finickies, whatever? So understanding the forage base is probably the biggest thing, right? And a lot of people don't know what we actually have for bait fish in Madison. So these are kind of the big ones. So golden shiners, same stuff swimming around in the tanks over there. Brook silver sides, those are those little skinny translucent things that are skipping around the surface. They're all over the place. There are actually fathead minnows in the Madison chain, believe it or not. They're actually a very common minnow species in a lot of streams. Young of the year sheephead, believe it or not. I've pulled many a small sheephead out of many walleyes in my life out of Madison. And obviously panfish, little bluegills, perch, crappies, things like that. You'll notice a general theme with a lot of the baits I have up here. They're very perchy looking, and there's a reason for that. Obviously, we have a pretty awesome perch fishery in Madison. It's changed a lot, but it does seem like numbers are coming back up, which is super cool. And I did notice the last couple of years on Mendota in particular, very large schools, like clouds of little bitty perch about that big, all over the place, especially midsummer out in the mud, like off of Marshall Park, kind of down on the Middleton shoreline, out in 20 to 30 feet of water, trolling lead core and stuff for walleyes. Huge clouds of little tiny perch out there. So there's all kinds of perch in the system. So match the hatch, right? And the sheephead thing's kind of weird too. No, they're not eating sheephead that big. They're eating little bitty sheephead, and everybody is too. The bass, the muskies, the pike. Sheephead are kind of overlooked, and you think about it, they look like a little shatty nugget when they're about that big. If it'll fit in their mouth, they'll eat it. They're not super picky. So that's kind of what we're rolling with here. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. What are these fish actually eating? That's what they're actually eating. Okay, fun stuff. Toys. We're going to talk about toys. So like Pat mentioned before, we got some goodies to give away. One of those is this guy. And for the record, I am not getting paid to talk about this. I just genuinely like these things. Not a sponsor of mine. This is a finicky fooler. How many of you have seen these before? Handful of people. How many of you have not seen one of these? Okay, so it's pretty cool. Obviously, ice fishing, there's all kinds of different gimmicks and toys and weird things, right? Because we have so much time to sit and think and come up with dumb ways to catch fish, right? You're staring down a hole all day. You got a lot of time to think. This thing's actually pretty dang cool, and it actually works in a couple different ways. So what I really like about this is that you can use whatever rod you have with you and make this thing work, which is pretty sweet. So I do have that automatic over here. I'll show you guys that in a minute. I literally pulled that out of my shed this afternoon when I got home from dropping the boat off, and I have not touched that since I went trout fishing in Kenosha last winter. So it's rigged up for trout, but it will serve the purpose just fine. But anyway, finicky fooler. So you'll notice we got our flag here. We got a rod sitting in this little rod base. And in fact, before we even set it all up, check this out. Ta-da! Super tiny. You can fit a bunch of these in a bucket or in a sled. They go together super quick and easy. Way less clumsy than a tip up or an auto. They're pretty damn cool. And again, I am not getting paid to say that, so that's how you know they actually don't suck. So the way this thing works is pretty simple, and it works a couple different ways. What I really like about these, particularly for walleye fishing or any application where you're dealing with really light biting or kind of finicky fish, finicky fooler, there you go, is you can set this thing to be basically as sensitive as you can probably imagine. It's pretty crazy. So the way this works is super simple. We got our flag back here, we got this little arm right here, and we got our rod. Super simple. So all we got to do is bend this little flag over, and obviously this will be set up here so you guys can come play with this afterwards. But basically you can play with the tension on this so you can make it, you know, kind of heavy if you're fishing for something a little bigger, or you got a big bait that's kind of pulling on the line, or crazy light where something even swims by it and bam, the flag goes up. What's cool though is this is basically like the ultimate finesse tip up where I can just open the bail. Wow, that's like barely on there. Okay, so grab this very gently, very slow, like barely touch it.
All right. Oh, okay.
Crazy light, right? It didn't take anything to set that off. Now, you're free spooled, fish can run off with the line. They don't feel anything. The trick, though, is to make sure that you get to this thing quick enough that they're not just going to swallow the hook. Holy crap, this reel sucks. That's not good. Don't buy this reel. Buy the finicky fooler. Don't buy this thing. Dude, this is so bad. This is so bad. That's all right. So anyway, basically, it's like a crazy, crazy light way to set up what I used to call an idiot stick, where I just dead stick something and let it sit there and basically just watch it, or use like a really whippy rod with a really soft tip so they don't feel the resistance, because obviously walleyes are kind of jerks like that. It was pretty easy to set, like you barely touched it and went off, right? Yeah, so it's actually on the side of the little trigger arm here. There's a little O-ring on here, so when you load this up, that snap goes on that little arm right there, and depending on, yeah, so back is lighter, forward is more tension. Yep, and then all I'm doing is opening the bail on the reel, putting the line underneath this little arm here, and when you pull on the line, boom. It takes nothing to set this thing off, so they don't feel anything. Very rarely does this thing pop and the fish drop the bait, which is pretty cool. And I use this for perch, crappies, all kinds of stuff, but walleyes are awesome with this too. The other cool thing is you can get them with or without the hook setting capability. This one has it. One thing to keep in mind though is the rod that you're putting in this, if you are going to use the hook setting portion of this, make sure that it has a metal guide on the end, not something with a ceramic insert, because you are putting metal on metal. And if you put metal on ceramic, that can be kind of a boo-boo. So don't do that. But now we've got a hook setter, just like an automatic fisherman. So when we pull on it, it's supposed to go off. You have to play with this just a little. Sometimes there's a little burr on the end of this wire here, but
I think also if you have the line under that other hook, when that trips,
I think that, yeah, yep, that makes it easier. You're right. I'm still in open water mode, guys. Bear with me. There you go. Boom. Yep. Thank you, Harley. So you kind of got a 2-in-1. You've got something that will free line or free spool a bait, no problem. They don't feel it. And if you want something that's a hook setting device, like if you're getting a lot of fish that are picking them up and dropping it, that's a really good way to combat that. I guess we'll move on to the auto. So this, I would say, is way more versatile and less clumsy than an auto. I do still use autos. I mostly use these for trout and pike. The walleyes, I've pretty much switched over to finicky foolers because they're a lot more versatile. And again, trying to pack as light as possible. When you got like 2 dozen of these things in a sled, that sucks. These are heavy, it's annoying. You have to try to match each rod to each base because they're all different and they're all set for each individual rod. So it's a pain in the ass. So I actually have all my rods numbered and I have all the bases labeled so I know which rod goes with which base, which is a pain in the butt, especially when your buddies borrow your stuff and you don't get the rod with the right base back and then nothing works. So these do work. I do still use them, but I'm a little more selective about how I use them. Versatility-wise, the finicky fooler is the way to go, and it'll work with just about any ice rod you already have. The autos, again, are still awesome. They work basically the same way, no flag. That's the one downside to this is when these go off, you either hear it because this front part falls and smacks that. And on the ice, it's a lot louder. It's kind of a hard smack. Or you just got to keep an eye out. And if you see a rod up for any reason, you need to go check it. Either it popped on its own or you got a bite. So the flag is really nice. You don't miss bites because of the flag. With autos, sometimes you do, especially in the dark. There's really no good way to run these in the dark. I put bells on them. The problem is if you have a really stiff rod, when this thing goes bang, your bell goes about 30 yards that way. So you burn through bells pretty quick. It does work, but I would say versatility-wise and price point-wise, the Finicky's where it's at. What do these run, Pat? What? Okay, yeah, an auto setup, like you can get them with a rod and reel and stuff. They're quite a bit more. They're probably 30, 40 bucks more. Yes.
I use that, but the thing I like about it has that bobber.
Yes.
You pull down. And
Yes.
You kind of watch that bobber going up.
Yep.
Too, so yeah.
So that's where some of the trade-offs, you start to run into some of the trade-offs. So with the Finicky, you don't have quite as much control over how much slack you're letting the fish take before the rod goes off if you're using it as a hook setting device. With the autos, you do. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. So the bobber, I don't have this one rigged up with a bobber. I actually set mine up. I basically take just a foam float and I run some light bucktail wire through it and I just hook it on to the line. So that way when it goes off, it just flies off the rod and then it can't get wrapped around the guides and do any weird stuff. But the same principle. So basically what we're talking about here is when we got this thing set up, we got our little trigger arm here. This thing's gonna smack me in the face. When you set these, by the way, whether it's the Finicky or the auto, do not stand over top of it. Stand off to the side. You will get whacked, especially if you're using a pretty heavy rod. This one's relatively stiff. This is one that I use for all kinds of stuff, but I would for sure use this for pike. So what we're talking about here, basically the basic function of this, and there is a hook on here, is when you pull on the line, boom, it hits them, right? What we're talking about though with the slack, which is actually really nice, especially for walleyes, is, and I don't have it set up that way, but basically if you ever see someone using one of these and you see there's a bobber in between the first two guides here, there's a reason for that. Basically what that bobber's doing is it's putting slack in the line. It's hanging down underneath those two guides there, right? So now we have about a foot of slack in here. That fish can run for about a foot before it puts enough tension on it that thing goes off and hits them. So that's one nice thing about the autos is you can give them the option to run off with it and then hit them versus they grab it and they get smacked right away, which is one thing that the Finicky doesn't do. So they both definitely have their ups and downs, but I would say overall, using both of these for quite a while now, I really like the Finicky. Someone's going to say a jaw jacker. What about a jaw jacker? It's the same thing as an auto. It's just a little different. So iFish Pros, they function a lot like the Finicky Fooler. That's a really good question. I have played with them a little bit. I have a couple of them. So the iFish Pro basically acts just like this thing. You basically set your rod and it functions essentially the same way. It's a little bit bigger and it doesn't break down quite as small as the Finicky does, but they serve the same purpose. They work the same way. And I wouldn't say that one is better than another. I like them both. But as far as portability goes, I like the Finickies a little bit better. They fit in places that iFish Pros just don't. Yeah, you can. So, yeah, basically those little tiny LED stick lights that you'd stick in like a light up bobber, you can actually stick those to the flag on these and you'll be able to see it when it goes up. The trick though is unless you get one with a mercury switch in it where, stands up and the light's on, you can use like the Frable ones on these. They don't work great though. They're kind of heavy and they're kind of hard to set. You need to block off the light with something so that way when you're facing towards it, when the thing actually goes off, then you see the light. When it's set, you don't see the light, if you know what I'm talking about, because the light's always on. I have played around with, like I said, the Frable tip-up, clip-on lights. They do work. Sometimes they go flying, but if you see a light flying through the air, there's probably a reason to go check your line, go see what's up. So yeah, you can play around with it a little bit. But yeah, you can absolutely put lights on them. Yes.
You use the app where you can put a sensor on that.
So I got the very first generation of that many, many years ago, actually when I was in college. I forgot what the brand was. Blue Tips, thank you. It worked until it didn't because they got wet and then they failed. And it was a product made for fishing. So, no, that was a long time ago. That was way back when they just first got started. And I got hooked up because a friend of a friend knew somebody in marketing or whatever, and they got some of these, and they're like, try these out. And I'm like, okay, and I broke them in like a week. So they're probably very different now. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. So, yes. Yeah. They won't clip onto it. The Frable. Yeah. So, but it could be something somebody comes up with. If you find a way to make that work, let everybody know or sell it. That'd be a good way to go. But yeah, those are super cool. They're super, super cool. They're really cool. Definitely. No, and I'm surprised it took as long as it did for that to happen. I mean, they've been around for a while now. So yeah, no, they're super cool. All right, so yeah, as far as set lines go, tip up. How could we not talk about a tip up? This is a tip up. How many of you have used a tip up before? Everybody. You probably set your tip ups up exactly the same way I do, so we don't really need to talk about it. I don't do anything special with these. The only weird thing, I guess maybe I do a little different, is I use my tip ups for everything. So I switch between pike and walleyes and XYZ, burbot, whatever. So I don't, actually that segues into kind of a cool point. I don't put weight on my leader, which might be a little weird. And you might be thinking, why wouldn't you do that? Because now your bait's going to be swimming around up here and getting all tangled up. Yes, sometimes that does happen. And if I have a really tenacious minnow that continues to do that, I would either donate that minnow to the lake or I will put a little split shot on, a few inches above just to kind of keep them down. But the way I rig these up, I put a little 1/4 ounce egg sinker on the main line here down to a VMC crankbait snap, which is kind of a goofy looking snap. I'll pass this around so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. The reason I go with that style snap, could you use any other snap? Yes. I like this one because it's kind of tapered and it doesn't seem to catch on the edge of the hole when you pull it up through. So which will make sense when you guys kind of see it. Walleye leader, it's about, 20-ish, 20 to 24 inches, 10-pound fluoro. Little hook. I don't go very big. This is about as big as I'll go. I want to say that's like a size 8. That's probably a size 8. And actually, Harley, I'm going to put them on the spot, ties up leaders here in the shop, and they're perfect. So if you need leaders and you don't want to mess around with tying them, get them here. So I'll pass this around. I'm going to take the leader off just because hooks, if I can get this apart. What's that? Just a loop. Actually, I'll tell you what. Yeah, yep. Just double up the line, tie it over itself, and that's it. Yep, pops right on, right off, no problem. You could use a swivel if you wanted to. I have done that before. I can't get this snap open. Oh my God, I might need some pliers. Dude, they are. Okay, I'm going to pass this around with a hook on it. Just be really careful.
What do you use for the main line?
Main line, usually a 20-pound tip-up line or 30. I like 20. It's a little thinner. You get a little more line on the spool than you do with the 30 or the heavier stuff. But yeah, just Dacron. I'm not super picky on that. Not super picky.
I see you usually use braid or just mono?
Both. We'll talk about that in a second here. So I'll pass this around. Please be careful. Oh, we found pliers. Perfect. Passing hooks around is sort of scary. Even though it's a room full of people who fish, it's still kind of scary. There we go. That is the one downside to these snaps. They are really, really hard to open and close. They're fantastic on crankbaits, and they actually work really well for this too. They don't get hung up real bad. So yeah, line. That's a really good question. So you'll notice I got a few different things up here. I do have mono on this auto rod. The reason I like mono on these, it just seems to perform a little bit better when it's cold. Now that being said, modern braid is not the same as it was 20 years ago. New braid is awesome. It doesn't get as waterlogged. I kind of like the stretch, to be honest with you, with the hook setting devices. Not all the time though. So with pike, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, I do run braid on those because I want a really hard hook set when I'm using the autos. With the walleyes and trout and stuff, I like the mono a little better because it's got a little bit of stretch to it. Jigging, I like braid. Smack the shit out of them. Crap out of them, sorry. Yeah. Hook them very hard. Which is goofy. And again, that's just personal preference. Can you use braid on those? Yes. Can you use mono jigging? No, yeah, but don't do that. Use braid. Braid's awesome. You can feel things. It does cool stuff. So yeah, jigging rod wise, I am not super picky. I am not tied to any one particular brand as far as rods go. This just happens to be a Mags. It's cool because it's green and it's black, I guess. I don't know. It's just a rod. I'm not super picky on that. If you want to get really dialed, though, check out Kevin's rods. They're freaking awesome. He has a bunch of them up front. Or I'm sure you would probably build one for somebody, right, if they wanted something totally custom. There you go. It's a one-stop shop, guys. We got everything. We got leaders, we got custom rods, you got bait, you got everything. So look at us. And awesome tacos, by the way, or Nestos on the other side of the building here. Fantastic. Legitimately really good. The Pastor is awesome. So anyway, jigging rod. I don't get super duper picky. I like something with a little bit softer tip to it just because I like to be able to watch the rod tip. Obviously, sometimes they bite really, really light. So being able to see your rod tip move, that could be all you get is a little boop. So being able to see that's kind of nice. And then obviously something that's got plenty of backbone when you hook into something big. Braid, usually 8 pound. I'll go up to 10. If I'm messing around like up on Green Bay and stuff, I'll go with at least 10. Sometimes I'll go up to like 12. But again, ice rod, you got a nice soft rod. You don't have to go crazy heavy on the line. That's what's kind of nice about it. So you can have a pretty finesse setup and still have a lot of power, which is nice. And you might notice I got a slab wrap on there. These things are awesome. I do, right there.
Oh, it's just really small.
Really small.
Oh, okay.
Really tiny. Yep, itty bitty. So that way when I screw up and I get too excited and I reel it up into my guides, it actually goes through the guides instead of breaking them. So, because I'm stupid and I get really excited sometimes. All the time. I did it like 5 times today on the river because I'm dumb. So leader-wise, again, talking about leaders, usually about 10-pound fluoro. Again, I will go lighter than that at times, and I do like to run a little tiny swivel. So this is just me. There's lots of different ways you can do that, but about 2 feet up or so, maybe not quite 2 feet, probably 20 inches or so, I do run a little bitty swivel because line twist sucks, especially when you're fishing with a jigging style bait like a jigging wrap. In fact, we did a video last winter in the test tube, the tube of truth, playing around with like jigging wraps and different types of jigs and showing the difference that having a swivel made. And I don't know if I was, maybe it would work, I don't know, but watching a jigging wrap go about this fast in circles, making a left hand, it's like NASCAR, but not as fun. Just going back and forth, I wouldn't want to eat that, but one that just darted around and then just stopped and laid down, that's the one I want to eat. So I do like to have a little swivel in there. Does it make that big of a difference? Maybe, I don't know. I personally think it does. So I always run some kind of a swivel. If you're scared of snap swivels or you think they look dumb or bulky or whatever, like I do, I like to run just a little bitty swivel up above the bait. And that's pretty much it. I'll pass this around so you guys can check this out. But I have no idea. Really small. It's probably like a, I don't know, 18 to 20 pound swivel. It's pretty tiny. It's pretty small. And I have not had one fail yet. But again, we're using a light rod, taking our time. The water's cold. They're not going nuts. So you can kind of get away with going with some of the lighter gear. All right. Another thing to touch on here. So I know Pat is giving away some hole covers here. One of the bigger issues I've seen people run into with autos, and when I first started using autos, I went through about 20 of these because the rod would go off, the fish would take off, and it would just like cut right through the foam. And it was when we're pike fishing and using braid, and it would just saw right through these. So it would just go right through the middle of it and the thing's toast. One thing that I like to do with these is I actually make that cut a little wider. So I'll take a knife and actually cut, maybe a 1/16 or a 1/4 inch, up to a 1/4 inch off each side. So you have a pretty big slot there So when you're fishing with one of these things, you've got your line through it. With a tip up, it's a little different, right? You pick the tip up, the whole thing comes up onto the ice, not a big deal. When you're using one of these hook setting devices or a finicky, when you walk up to it and you're trying to get this thing off, if you're yanking on it, pulling on it, that's kind of a problem, right? So having a nice big gap there makes it really easy for that hole cover to come off. The finicky fooler hole covers, I'm not going to open this because Pat will get mad at me. They usually, so this one's a little bit on the tighter side. They usually come about that wide. So they already kind of thought of that, and they're like, oh, yeah, maybe we should make that a little bit wider, which is cool. So that's just one little tip. If you're using one of these finickies or a hook setting device, make sure that if you are using a hole cover, make sure there's enough room to be able to get that thing off the line and you're not yanking on the line while you're also yanking on the rod. That doesn't work super well. Let's see. What else? I guess baits. Yeah, we'll pass both of these around. Obviously, you guys have seen hole covers, but the finicky ones are cool. They're harder. They're kind of more like a heavy-duty foam. They're pretty durable. I've got quite a few of those. I've only broken 2 of them. One of them because I ran it over, and the other one, a kid was like jumping on it when I wasn't watching because he was bored because apparently fishing's not fun. So those are the only 2 I've broken though, and I break a lot of stuff. So actually, while we're at it here, let's pass. We'll pass the finicky fooler around here too. It's a little clumsy with the rod in it, but play around with it. You kind of get the idea of how that thing works. It's really cool, and they're very light too. So I'll also pass this Otto around. It's a beast. It's a beast. Now, that being said, when I am fishing for big stuff, like if we're in the harbor, those do work for trout. We were catching browns and steelhead on those last winter. But when I'm specifically fishing for big stuff, so pike and like big trout and stuff, I do like the Ottos a little better. I think they're less likely to get sucked down a hole. They're just bigger. Yes?
I'm an auto salesman, but they also come with that antifreeze.
Yes, that's right.
It's actually really nice.
Very nice. So I don't have this one rigged up with those because we're fishing on a warm day and I didn't need it. But there's basically like this little plastic, it's a de-icing bobber that goes on the line like a regular bobber. But basically you fill it with this mixture of like glycerin and some other goodies, alcohols and stuff. And it's basically a little antifreeze bobber so your line can slide freely through that. So if you're fishing in sub-freezing temperatures, obviously, you get a tip up frozen in the ice, it's a pain in the ass. You got to kick it and you break it and it's a whole thing. That allows you to use these when it's cold out. So the line will always move. So even though your hole's iced up, the line can still move. So you still have to go and bust your hole open, but you can still fish, which is pretty cool. And I think Pat has a whole bunch of those. Perfect. I can't believe I forgot that. I kind of can. All right. Let me see. Where am I at here? Okay. Fun stuff. Lures. Everybody likes to talk about lures. I don't have a lot of stuff up here because it's really simple. Thank you very much. So yeah, the little de-icing bobber, these are a pain in the ass to get on your line. It's not easy, but once you get it on, leave it on. But basically this thing pops open. I'll pass this around so you guys can check it out. It pops open. It's just like a regular bobber. You throw your de-icing fluid in it. The line runs through the top, through the bottom, snap it shut. And you have to try to do this without spilling that stuff. That stuff is like gold, and when you run out, you're kind of screwed. And then drop it in the hole really quick, and then you're good to go. Your line won't freeze. It's super cool. Works really, really well. And if you can find the recipe for this de-icing fluid and sell it by the gallon, you'd be a very rich person. This stuff's awesome. It's not cheap. Yes?
So, don't repeat this.
Shh.
But they have that RV antifreeze that's biodegradable and safe.
Really?
They have it in your drinking water,
Really?
You use it when you winterize your RV.
Yeah.
So I was trying to use that last year and stuff. So.
Did it work?
Well, it was working, but I only got to experiment a couple times.
Okay.
You can get gallons of that for
Right.
$2. So.
I didn't know they made it.
Get the stuff that's safe though. For the
Right.
environment, so.
Yeah, so I didn't know that even existed until just now because like forever antifreeze is one of those things like don't leave it out because it's sweet and things will eat it and
It's what you put in your water lines for a RV so that
Okay.
freeze,
Sure. Well, that's good to know.
I just stumbled
We couldn't hear. What did you use?
Biodegradable antifreeze
for an RV.
for like
Put
RVs
in
for
your water
plumbing.
systems, your
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing. We're all learning stuff. That's awesome. Well, thanks for. No, that's cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to try that. All right, baits. I keep it incredibly simple when it comes to baits. Obviously on tip-ups, minnows, right? Shiners, fatheads, stuff like that. For the most part, I'm a medium shiner guy. Everything eats a medium shiner, which is kind of cool. So when you're not catching walleyes, you're catching pike, vice versa, or bass, whatever. I will say, though, mid-winter, when things kind of suck, everyone has that mid-winter lull, right, where it just kind of sucks. I will downsize. I will go down to small shiners or little blacktail chubs if you can find them. Even fathead minnows, like really big, like toughies, if you will. I will downsize at times if it's really tough, especially if it's a high pressure system, high skies, crappy day, clear night, and super cold. Sometimes I'll go really, really small. You can also go completely opposite of that and just swing for the fences and put something really big out. You're not going to get a lot of bites, but the one or two that you might get are probably going to be pretty big. Where do you hook them? How many people hook them in the tail? Few people? Couple people? Most of you go through the dorsal fin? Okay, anyone go through the head? The lips? Okay.
I've done the lip.
Through the lips? Okay. Yours or a fish? No, I got hooked in the face once pulling a fish through a hole, so that was super cool. Yeah, I usually just go through the dorsal fin. Obviously, they try to eat head first. If it's a big enough fish, they just inhale the whole thing. But I try to go through the dorsal. Biggest reason being that when that minnow finally tires out and it's just kind of sitting there, it'd look kind of stupid if it was just like hooked by the tail and it's just sitting there head down or, head up, I guess. If you ever see a dead or dying fish, what do they usually do? They kind of swim up and then they fall down. And when they fall down, they're usually, I guess, slightly nose up, but they're more or less parallel to the bottom. So that's kind of how I like to rig things up. Again, we can sit here and overthink it all we want. At the end of the day, we're putting a minnow on a hook and they either eat it or they don't, right? Yes. Lots of questions. Go, yeah.
One thing I use on my minnows, I don't know if other people, is those little bait stopper. You know what those are?
Yeah.
Those little rubber things.
Yep.
Do you use those?
I have experimented with those a little bit.
I lose my minnows all the time if I don't.
Yeah, I just kind of write it off when I lose them. Like, screw it, whatever. I'll just grab another one. Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, I bought 5 dozen this morning. Trust me, I have. And I did not use 5 dozen. So, yeah, I have played around with that a little bit. Also, I use just panfish plastic, like a little wedgie or something, and put that on there. That works too. Shrink tubing, like you'd use on like a bucktail wire or something, or wiring or whatever, that works too. But it's a little harder to get on and harder to get off when you're resetting it. But yeah, even just a little piece of plastic. Yeah, that does help. So what we're talking about is something to keep the bait on the hook. You can actually get a product that is designed to do that. It, goes onto the hook when you actually have the minnow on there and it kind of keeps it from sliding off. You can also just use a little piece of soft plastic. That works too. If the fish is ripping it off though, the fish is ripping it off. That's just how it is. Sometimes the fish win, unfortunately. Any other live bait questions on the walleye stuff?
How do you keep your bait alive? Do you do any tricks for?
When I'm fishing or at home?
Usually it's like for a few days or something.
Sure. So I have an aquarium aerator from a long, long time ago. It was, I don't know, a $30 piece of junk, whatever, cheapo, and just a little stone on the end of it. And I have one of those Frable bait station things, the yellow lid, white thing or whatever. I've had that thing for a ridiculously long time, and I've only broken one latch on it, which is pretty amazing. Not a sponsor, but they do actually hold up really well.
Do you use the minnow food or anything like that?
I don't do anything. So I keep them outside and just keep oxygen on them. Yep, the colder they are, the lower their metabolism, the less they have to eat. They will eat, though, fish flakes. Yep, just like goldfish food. Yep, they will eat it. Fatheads, shiners, they'll eat stuff like that. And suckers, so musky guys, pike guys, waxies. Rip a waxie in half or spikes, drop them in with your suckers, and they'll eat those. Yes, sir?
Also, if you were to refill the water, the water doesn't contaminate with the dead fish, that usually helps for the...
Yes.
for keeping the-
Yeah, keeping the water clean is probably, I would say that's probably the biggest thing. Next to oxygen, food is kind of the last thing I worry about, unless you're buying like a huge bunch of minnows, which I used to do, and it's a total pain. Don't do that. Come here, get bait from Pat. Yeah, water changes are a big one. Now, when it's cold, if you're keeping them cold, you're keeping them outside. You're not going to have to change it as frequently. Again, their metabolism's lower. They're generating less waste. The water's going to stay cleaner longer. But yeah, I try to change the water usually every few days. Depending on what you're using for bait, using the dechlorinating drops can be very beneficial. I found fathead minnows are very hardy. You could probably put them in that toilet and they'd be fine for about a week. Maybe not, but at least for a few days. But shiners tend to be kind of wimpy. So when I used to work for the DNR, I worked as a water quality biologist, so we did shocking and stuff. Almost every time we did electrofishing surveys, every shiner that we collected died because they're just wimps. They're super wimpy fish. They seem to be a little more susceptible to dirty water, in my opinion. So I do try to change the water out usually every other day or at least every 3 days with shiners. But again, keeping them cold is a good way to go. And if you have a beer fridge, how many people have a garage fridge? I threw mine out. It was gross. It like growled at me once. I was done with it. I need to get a new one, but throw them in your fridge. Keep them in the dark, keep them cold. They kind of calm down. They're cold. They'll be in good shape for quite a while.
Just throw the bucket right in the fridge?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and if you have an aerator, awesome. If you don't, if you change the water every few days, you'll be okay. Just keep an eye on it, and you can always just kind of scoop some water out, add a little fresh water to it as needed, but just keep an eye on them. If they look like they're doing bad, especially if they're coming up to the surface, if you see them just grabbing air at the surface, they need oxygen. So either do a water change or find a way to oxygenate the water. Yep. Any other live bait stuff? That's a really good question. Personally, I don't really mess with it. Does it work? Yes. Can you catch fish without it? Yes. I like to just keep my stuff as simple as possible, so I don't really mess with the blades and stuff. That being said, though, if the water's really dirty, particularly late ice on the north end of Mendota, obviously we have Cherokee Marsh, right? That's got water always moving into the north end of the lake there. There are times, especially, again, late ice, where we get a bunch of melt, a bunch of runoff, we get dirty water coming into the system. That's when I'll start playing around with blades on my leaders, like a little gold or a little silver blade, like a number 2 or number 3 Colorado blade, just to give it a little shine. With the walleyes, I don't really mess with it, but with the pike, I do. Yes. Yes, sir.
I have a quick question. So I don't have a boat, but I fish from the shore around the Chains of Madison. So what do you do when the walleyes aren't really biting? Because around Thanksgiving, I was getting a whole bunch of them from the shoreline. Then when it was first ice, the bite really kind of slowed down from shore. What other tactics do you kind of use? Are there any other good spots around shore that stay open when there's not any ice on them? Or
you're talking more open water type stuff?
Kind of say now we're still kind of warm, but not really that
sure.
warm. But
so that's where it kind of gets a little tricky. Wind and obviously ice, floating ice is kind of an issue. Fishing the not wind-blown side of the lake, that sounds kind of counterintuitive. Normally you want to fish the wind-blown side. A little bit cleaner water makes it a little bit easier. They can see a little bit better, which is weird because normally you think dirty water, they're dumb, they can't see. I found that usually fishing the not wind-blown side works a little bit better. And there are times where it just slows down. That just happens. Sometimes we get big cold fronts that shuts things down. Normally cold fronts can be really good, especially going into the fall. It seems like fish kind of like seasonal progression. They want change. They don't like the instability. And this fall has been all over the place, which definitely makes things weird. So cold fronts can be really good, but it can also be tough too. So that's one thing to pay attention to and maybe kind of keep a log of is nights when you're struggling or you're just not even seeing fish, looking in the water with a headlamp, you're not even seeing them. Make a note of that and make a note of the conditions that you're observing that in. Yes?
Speaking of barometric pressure, are you one of the big believers in barometric pressure?
Ice fishing, I've seen some correlations between pressure changes, particularly a high to low pressure drop, where there does seem to be sometimes more frequent or longer bite windows through the ice. Open water, yes, especially with kind of more predator species, particularly muskies. Yeah, yep, that high to low, that drop in pressure seems to be a trigger. Usually a few days of stable pressure, whether it's low or high, usually high pressure, because obviously high pressure, bluebird skies, that's usually a tough day of fishing, right? Not always the case, but usually after about the second or third day of high pressure when things kind of settle out. If you know it's going to be a week of high pressure, usually after that third day, things kind of settle back down and the fish become more active again. And then obviously what goes up must come down. So once that pressure drops, then you'll see another good bite window. So that being said, is that a definite rule? No. It's kind of like the whole moonrise, moonset, moon overhead, moon underfoot thing for muskies. I've caught them when the moon wasn't doing anything. Middle of the day, flat, calm, super hot, crappy day to be out, and boom, someone hooks a 45-inch fish out of nowhere. And it's like, why did that happen? I don't know. It's a fish. It decided to eat. So, but overall, yeah, pressure changes are great. Yep, even through the ice, which is interesting. Let's talk about lures. We haven't talked about lures at all. How are we doing on time, Pat? Holy cow. All right, we haven't talked about pike. That's okay, pike are really easy. So as far as baits go, I keep things incredibly simple. I'm gonna pass these around. I am sponsored by Rapala. I'm not gonna hide that, but they work. How many people use jigging wraps? How many people use slab wraps? That one that I got on that jigging rod going around. That's like my new favorite thing. I freaking love those, especially in dingy, dirty water. They're awesome. The rattle, the action, everything about it's awesome. They're great open water baits too. How about ripping wraps? Okay, just about everybody. Awesome. They're not just for open water. These are great. You'll notice a general theme with what I'm handing around. And as far as like sizes and stuff, this is what I like to use. Also that larger slab wrap on that jigging rod that's going around. That's about as big as I'll go around here for the most part. But there's a general theme to these. And again, they're all perch. Do you have to use perch? Absolutely not. If you like purple, use purple. You like chartreuse, use chartreuse. White is another really good color. I just picked perch because I like perch. That's my confidence color. Yes?
Do you find glow makes a difference?
Yeah, definitely. So after dark, yeah, I like glow baits. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, how many minnows are floating around in Lake Monona, Lake Mendota that, well, now with all the chemicals and stuff, there might be a couple, but how many of them are actually glowing? None of them, right? These fish have adapted over millions and millions of years to be able to see those bait fish in the dark without any help, right? Their eyes are incredible. So do you need a glow bait? No, but I do think it does kind of call fish in from a distance. I have seen that, and playing with forward-facing sonar a little bit, I have seen fish engage baits from what I believe to be further away than they would with a different color or a not glowing bait. Kind of like salmon fishing. Anybody troll for salmon? A couple people. Glow spoons after dark, right? It's a thing. It works. So do you have to use glow stuff after dark? No. And it's kind of weird, you know, if you're somebody that just uses glow stuff after dark to go to something that doesn't glow. But again, just think about what's actually happening down there. None of those bait fish are glowing, right? So they've adapted to be able to see without anything glowing. So, but it's a confidence thing. And the color thing is a confidence thing too. Now, walleyes, yeah, they can be a little bit finicky when it comes to color, but for me personally, it's action, size, and profile over color. Color's the last thing that I worry about, and that goes for open water too. So I'm more focused on what style of bait I'm using than I am what color. We can figure out the color later, but I want to figure out what style bait is working best. When in doubt, a jigging wrap. Jigging wraps are awesome, keeping it super simple. What about spoons? Nobody asked, but I'm going to ask. Yes, I like spoons. Swedish pimples, Castmasters, buckshot spoons. Hammered gold is my favorite color in Madison. Hammered gold is my favorite color everywhere. I don't know why this one works so well, but it just does. Also, black gold husky jerks if you're out casting at night for the next few weeks here. Money. Also, perch shadow wrap, number 11, slow sink minnow is also awesome. To tip it with a minnow head or not? Sure, why not? Is it a scent thing? Maybe. Is it the fact there's something just dangly there? Maybe. Is it because it's bigger with that on there and it slows the fall of the spoon? Maybe. I have no idea why it works, but yes, it does work. How about jigging wraps? Does anybody put a minnow head on their jigging wraps? A few people, okay. There's definitely something to that. So a couple winters ago, I was up in Green Bay fishing out on Larson's Reef out of Sturgeon Bay, and I had a buddy sitting right next to me. We were fishing identical jigging wraps. I was using a minnow head, he was not, and I outfished him literally 10-1. Literally 10-1. I'm like, dude, you're gonna put a minnow head on? He's like, no, I'm gonna catch one. I'm like, no, you're not. And then he put a minnow head on and he caught one. So Does it make a difference? I think it can at times. Do you have to do that? No. You're definitely not down and out if you don't have minnows. That's pretty much it. Other than playing with cadence, I'm not going to get super specific on that because every day is different. Just read the fish. If you have electronics, it can tell you an awful lot about what's going on. Jim is a electronics wizard, so if you have any questions, I'm putting that on you. That's that guy right there. He's a freaking legend. So it's part of the reason I'm kind of nervous tonight having him in here. Yeah, cadence can make a big difference. One thing that I will say, though, that a lot of people screw up, and I think that's kind of universal across using any kind of electronics, is when people see fish coming in, whether it's live scope, 2D, a flasher, they slow down. They start slowing down as the fish is coming into the bait. Don't do that. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop. That fish engaged the bait for a reason, right? Now you're changing your cadence as the fish is coming in. Already has its mind made up and wants to check it out, right? Now all of a sudden you're changing it. Don't do that. You see a fish coming. What I usually do and what I tell people is stop looking at the screen. If you see a mark coming in, watch your rod. Don't watch the screen. I will tell you when that fish is on your bait. You just keep doing what you're doing and pay attention. And you usually hook quite a few more fish once you bypass that. I don't know what it is. Everybody wants to slow down. It's weird. You can even try speeding up, but don't slow down. That's like musky fishing. Don't stop the bait. Always keep the bait moving, right? If anything, speed up. Same thing with fishing through the ice. Yes?
This might be an unfair question since you're sponsored by Rabo, but
Nah.
Have you compared the jigging wrap to any of its clones, and do they act differently?
Yeah, so what's cool is they all have kind of their own little nuances and they all run a little different, which is great. So like the hyperglides have a slower fall to them, which is kind of nice, which I actually really like. So when I'm fishing deep, I like the jigging wraps because they get down a lot quicker and you have a little quicker response when you're snapping it. Up shallow though, the hyperglides are awesome. I really like those a lot. And the, is it a puppet minnow? I think is the other one. Somebody help me with that. There's so many of them now, right? Right, there's so many of them. They all work. They all work. Yep, but they're all a little different, which is cool. And it's nice that now we have all these options, right? 20 years ago, you had a jig and wrap or a jig and wrap, right? Now we have all these options, which is super cool. So yeah, play around with them. Absolutely. Yes?
So how do you go fishing in like deeper water without spending hundreds of dollars on a Vex line? Like how do you know if there's fish in there or like walleyes without?
You're kind of swinging for the fences. That's a legit question. I mean, that's how it used to be though. Back in the day before there was electronics, it was, I fish here in a boat or I see other people fishing here. I know there's a drop off or I know there's rock or whatever, and trying to kind of map out where you are based on what you see on the shoreline and stuff. Actually, a good way to do that is on your phone. Yep, you can, in some cases you can use Google Earth to kind of find main lake features. Otherwise, the Navionics app is a really good one. I think it's relatively inexpensive, but it's pretty accurate and you can get really close to where you want to be. That's a really good way to go without buying electronics. Now, without electronics, you don't really know what's going on down there, but general rule of thumb, if you're fishing out deep, make sure you're up off the bottom. And that's another thing too. Don't be afraid to set your lines up off the bottom a ways, especially if you're in deep water. Up shallow, maybe fish kind of where you're confident, right? But when you're out in deep water, don't be afraid to run your bait even up like 5-6 feet off the bottom. They can see it. The water's really clear in the winter. If they want it, they're gonna come get it. So don't be afraid to run your stuff up high. That includes jigging or set lines, tip ups, finickies, things like that. Don't be afraid to put them up high. And generally speaking, you're gonna catch more of the active fish doing that, right? The lazy fish aren't gonna swim 5 feet off the bottom to eat something. I actually heard once upon a time, and I don't know if this is so true now because there's fewer people perch fishing, but a long time ago, there were guys that used to run tip-ups literally like 2 feet under the ice over like 60, 70 feet of water on Mendota and catch really big walleyes at night, even during the daytime. And what they were doing is those fish were coming up to eat the dead perch under the ice. All the little fish people were letting go that didn't make it, they're coming up to eat those perch. And the pike do the same thing too. Mm-hmm. So kind of interesting, right? And that was over 60, 70 feet of water. Let's think about that. There's walleyes creeping a foot or two. Last winter, I was on the Fox River in De Pere. First time ever ice fishing out there. We were catching walleyes in 20 feet of water, 1.5 feet underneath the ice. On that same slab wrap that was getting passed around here. I am not kidding. They do crazy stuff. There are no rules. Walleyes do weird stuff. So don't be afraid. And that's where electronics were huge. If we didn't have electronics, we would not have figured that out. Basically what happened is we didn't know what we were doing. We just went and joined the crowd and we're like, this looks good. And at about dark, we had all these marks that would come through right under the ice. And as soon as you see a mark, you burn your bait up to it, but we were spooking them because we were trying to get up so quick and your cone angle is so narrow right under the hole that by the time we saw them, they were in the hole. So you spook them when you get the bait next to them. So then my buddy who borrowed another buddy's live scope or Panoptics or whatever, set it up so we could see underneath the ice about 8 feet out. So we could see fish coming from a ways out. We'd all get our baits up in front of them. We started catching them and they were walleyes. Literally just under the ice in 20 feet of water.
Why do you think they were coming up that high?
There was bait up high. We didn't see it though. So one of those guys went back 2 days later and he was popping holes. All kinds of little bugs and stuff were popping up out of the hole. And then you could see bait fish on the graph. So they were probably keyed into some kind of bait fish that was right under the ice dealing with some kind of bug hatch or whatever. So the walleyes were up high. Okay. So yeah, don't be afraid to do that. Especially if you're marking bait up high, do that. We can skip that. Any walleye questions? More walleye questions. We're gonna blow through the pike. Pike are pretty easy. How many people like fishing for pike? Pretty much everybody, right? How many people have got a 40-incher out of Mendota? A few people? Okay, a few people. It's hard, right? Even with a 40-inch minimum, it's hard. They're big, smart, old fish, right? And it takes a lot to grow a big pike. 40 inches is a big freaking pike. I've only got one 40-incher out of Mendota in my entire life, whatever that's worth. That was a 38.5 out of the Triangle, by the way, several years ago. There's some big ones in Monona, yeah. So what's interesting, and I think this has a lot to do with fish keeping culture changing. It seems like fewer people are keeping as many fish as they used to. And it seems like people that are getting into fishing just are a lot more catch and release than they are catch and kill, right? And I'm all about if you want to keep fish, go for it, but do so responsibly. It seems like now that there's more catch and release with fish like that, we're seeing bigger ones. So Monona and Wabisa, Monona especially, we've been running into a lot more big pike out there in the last probably 5 years than I've ever seen. So, and I know Jeff Hansen, who guides muskies here in Madison, I think he has 3 over 40 out of Monona this year. And one of them was like way over 40, like big, like 43, like friggin' giant. So don't overlook the other lakes if you want a big one. Go to Monona. Where are they? Lake Monona. Pretty much everywhere. And that's what's kind of fun and also really frustrating about pike, especially on Mendota. So this fish is my buddy Jim. He's not here. We're going to put him on the spot. This was on Wabisa a couple years ago. We were perch fishing, and I brought along a couple of autos rigged up for pike. And he was like, why? And I'm like, because we're probably going to catch one. We caught like 5. So you notice the pile of perch underneath them. They go where the food goes, right? And obviously they eat everything. So they can go pretty much anywhere. So we were out in the basin in the middle of Lake Wabisa, 37 feet of water, catching pike like 5 feet down. You just see this random mark come rolling by and I'm like, well, it's something. And it's a big long mark. It didn't look like a carp. I'm like, it's probably something looking to eat something. So I put a shiner down 5 feet and we were there probably 15 minutes and bam, auto goes off and caught a pike 5 feet down in 37 feet of water. And Jim's like, no way. I'm like, yeah, dude, way. So, so I guess how many people run lines when you do put out tip-ups and stuff? How many of you run a line right under the ice, like right underneath the ice? A few people. How many people are really not confident in doing that?
Until now.
Yeah, okay, so, and for good reason, right? It's kind of weird. Like your mind doesn't go to, I'm going to keep this thing way up high. Where, it's a really crappy picture, but where is that fish's eye? Where are its eyes located? They're looking forward, they're looking up. They're not looking down. Will they go down? Yes. They're looking forward, they're looking up. If you look at a walleye, they're looking forward, they're looking up. You look at a bass, they're looking forward, they're looking up. Fish above the fish. Don't fish underneath the fish. So what a lot of times what is happening, and I do see this a lot more often, early ice and late ice. Obviously, they'll be cruising right under the ice all winter long, but usually when there's some kind of a die-off of either weak or sick fish or a big oxygen fluctuation or something, you get these dead fish that obviously die and eventually float up underneath the ice. They're just swimming along picking off easy meals. How many of you have ever used dead bait to catch pike? Few people? Okay. How about muskies? Anyone ever drag around a dead sucker and catch a muskie? That's like my favorite thing to do. Over on Pewaukee and Okauchee, that's what they do. They literally kill their suckers on purpose, set them on the bottom, and they catch more fish on dead suckers than they do live suckers. Not kidding. It's freaking weird. So pike are really opportunistic feeders. How about catfishing? Fishing up in Cherokee Marsh in the spring with dead bait, catching pike. Yeah, they eat everything. We've caught walleyes up there on half a bluegill before. Like they're opportunistic feeders. So don't ever be afraid to put a line way up high, which is kind of weird. But I promise, and I know the whole like you only get 3 lines, so I feel confident in putting them all down here. Just put one of them up high and see what happens. You never know.
They like hot dogs.
They love hot dogs. They like brats too. Yeah, they do like hot dogs. I lost $100 in college, and I had to drink a Busch Light full of dead minnows. Because I didn't believe it, and they like hot dogs. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a thing. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, it's kind of interesting. They're all over the place. Now, that being said, the biggest fish usually gets the best spot in my experience. So if I'm swinging for the fences, if I'm going to Mendota and I'm looking for the biggest fish possible, I'm looking for kind of like a spot on the spot. So for me, that is like the steepest part of a drop off, the very tip of a point, maybe like a little, I've got actually a new secret spot that I'm really excited to try this year that I found casting a few weeks ago. And we pulled 4 pike over 35 inches in like 10 casts out of this one little spot. And it's definitely a spot. So I'm really excited. I'm not telling you where it is. Someone could put like an air tag on me or something later and probably find it. Guess what? It's off of Governor's Island, which is a giant main lake point with all of those crazy things happening. There's a little spot in the weeds that does this crazy little horseshoe into the weeds. So there's this little pocket in the weeds, and those fish just load up in that little pocket. They just sit there, wait for stuff to come cruising by, and boom. So little things like that can make a big difference. I'm also going to run big baits too. So do you catch more fish on small bait? Probably. Medium shiners, large shiners. I'm talking like the big boys. Do you have any of those real big ones yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Two.
You better
And
get
smelt
some.
too.
Smelt, yes. Yeah, for these big pike, it's amazing how big of a bait they can eat. Their mouths are huge. They're gigantic. They can fit a really big bait in their mouth. You are going to weed out a lot of the smaller fish going with a really big bait. That being said, we're swinging for the fences, right? Not going to get as many bites, and you might get some false flags and whatever because you got a big old bait on there. But if you're looking for a really big one, big bait. And I'm talking like shiners like yay big. YouTube. How many people watch YouTube videos, fishing videos? Don't watch mine. They're terrible. There's a guy in Canada, Jay Siemens. How many of you have heard of Jay? Jay's a super cool dude. I got to meet him once. Really, really cool guy. Look at the size of some of the baits they use up there. Granted, their like average fish up there is like a 38 incher, right? They catch stupid big pike, but they're using like tullibees and white, like straight up whitefish that are like that big. They're huge, and those fish have them gone. So don't be afraid to go big on that stuff. Where do you hook them? Dorsal fin. Keep it upright. That's the biggest thing. One thing I will add, so going back to like the tip ups and autos and stuff, obviously you're sizing up, right? So leader material, I like a 30-pound fluoro for the most part. Why don't you use steel? I don't know. I like fluoro. I've found that I do get more bites with fluoro. Can you get bit off? Absolutely. Have I been bit off? Yes, a couple of times. But when you set the hook, instead of just reefing on them, just lean into them, more like a circle hook. Just start pulling, just ease into them, because the first thing that fish is going to do when it feels resistance, it's going to start shaking its head. Usually if you keep pressure on them, they're going to hook themselves. So there's no need to just jerk on them. Now that being said, if you're using a hook setting device, I would not use fluorocarbon, because when that thing goes off and it hits them super quick, you can cut the line. The Beaver Dam leaders are actually pretty decent. This one, what is this, 24-pound? This is steel. I thought they used to make a titanium one. They may still make a titanium one. Otherwise, what I usually do, unfortunately, the company that makes this stuff isn't making it anymore, but there's a brand of wire called Terminator wire. It's a Rapala brand. It's a tieable titanium wire. You can actually tie knots with it, and I use 20 to 30 pound tieable titanium, go straight to the treble hook. Usually like a size 6 to a size 5 or so on the treble hook, and that'll be pretty much entirely bite proof. The downside with steel is it can get kinked, and then it just looks kind of wonky. So that's why I like the titanium, it doesn't kink. It will eventually kink, but if you get it to that point where it's so kinked up, you got your money's worth out of it. Grab a new one or make a new one. Otherwise, there's another brand called Not Too Kinky. I think they're based out of Florida. They make the same stuff. It's a nickel titanium alloy. You can tie knots with it. You can get it online. It works great for that stuff too. But I do generally prefer to use the fluoro. I feel like I do get more bites on the fluoro. So that's pretty much it. As far as like, so if you're using a hook sending device, just 20 pound braid's fine. Whatever rod you think is appropriate is fine. You don't have to go super nuts with it. Fly guy coming through clutch. Here you go. Tieable stainless steel, 35 pound. There you go. Leave it to the fly guy to come through clutch with the leader material. There you go. Pat's got you covered if you want to tie your own leaders. You can tie with that, or you could crimp it if you want to. Titanium, if you choose to crimp it, be very careful. Titanium does weird stuff. So there's really no way to tell when that titanium wire is fatiguing to the point of failure. And so over the years, you might be like, why haven't people made bucktails out of titanium? Because it flexes and stuff. Some companies have, and some of them work very well, and they paid a lot of money to figure out the tolerances that the machining has to be at to crimp that wire to not compromise it and crush it and crack it and break it. So when you set the hook on a 55-inch fish, your bucktail doesn't explode. You need to be very careful if you're crimping titanium wire. It's very easy to overdo it and compromise it. So tie it. And just do a clinch knot, just a regular wrap it a couple times through the loop, pull it tight. It will not cinch all the way down because it's wire, but it won't come undone. It works really, really well. So that's my 2 cents on the leader stuff. So tip ups, I prefer fluoro, 30 pound. You can go up to 40 if you want. About a size 5 treble hook and good to go. Treble versus single hook. I don't really care. I know there's a lot of people that like to use just a regular single hook. There's less damage if they do swallow it.
Are you going to use a circle hook or something else?
So circle hooks are tricky. Circle hooks are tricky because you don't always know which way the fish is going, which is tricky. So you can easily pull it out of their mouth. Basically with a circle hook, you're depending on that fish pulling away from the anchor point of that line, right? So basically you'd have to just hold onto the line and let the fish swim away and then kind of lean into them. You can do it. I've done it, but I've missed quite a few fish with circle hooks. On the other hand, just a really big octopus hook gives you a little bit of an advantage over the circle hook. So it doesn't really matter which way they're going. It kind of does. You can still pull it out of their mouth. Treble hooks, obviously, you got 3 points, so you got 3 chances to send something home. I guess the jury's kind of out. And I know my buddy Michael Hansen, who used to guide down here quite a bit, he basically only uses single hooks. He calls them J hooks, but it's just a regular hook, like a beefy Aberdeen hook. They work just fine. But that's where the hook set comes in, right? Instead of just sending it home, just put pressure on them and then just kind of lean into them and let that hook find a soft spot to lock in. Obviously, you're dealing with a really bony head. It's hard to get hooks in them. So instead of reefing on them, just lean into them gradually, add some pressure, because once that fish figures out something's up, it's going to try to go the other way of what's pulling on it, right? So it'll end up hooking itself. Yes?
Do you ever use a quick strike rig where you can just set it immediately and just hook them without the
Yes. Yeah. So actually, Harley's leader here is kind of like that. So it's a double hooked rig. You can put one. With the double hook rigs, I like to do one kind of midway through the bait and one up towards the head. So depending on the size of the bait, if it's a really big bait, normally they'll grab it head first. They want to try to swallow it head first. That's the path of the least resistance, easiest way to go down their throat. So when in doubt, put your hook kind of towards the front of the bait rather than the back of the bait when it comes to pike. And walleyes too, but Yeah, so you can use a quick strike rig. The tricky part though is most quick strike rigs are really bulky, and if the fish are in kind of a finicky mood, they may be turned off by all that hardware on it. But something like this would work really well for that. Yep, you got 2 hooks, you know that they're at least one of them is probably where it needs to be. You can get on them right away. Yep. And I would say that with tip-ups in general, I don't wait. I get to it as quick as I can. If I see that T-bar going, I'm on it. I'm on it right away. Especially with pike, because all they do is swim and eat. They don't think, they don't sit there and chew on it like a walleye does or whatever. They just go. As soon as you got them, you got them. So yeah, with pike, yeah, go ahead and hit them right away. I try to hit them as quick as I can so I can avoid digging hooks out of them. Yep, good question. Good question. All right, and then the weed thing. Touch on weeds again real quick here. Green weeds are good, brown weeds are bad. If the weeds look slimy and gross and just not nice, if it's not something you would like sneak in somebody's salad as a joke, maybe you would, I don't know. I wouldn't fish it. So what typically happens, you know, like we were talking about before with weed growth, dying and growing and stuff, green weeds are good, brown weeds are bad. So generally, as they die, they break down all the aerobic bacteria and stuff, start decomposing stuff, they start sucking oxygen out of the water, becomes an anoxic environment. The bait leaves, the predators leave. So that's one thing to watch for. And late ice, you know, pike typically, at least around here, they're usually spawning under the ice or right when the ice goes out. And usually they're coming into kind of shallow, weedy bays. The best weeds you can find. If they're all slimy and gross, I wouldn't mess with it. I'd get just outside of the weeds and kind of head them off as they're kind of hanging out there. But again, every year is different. So, yep, slimy weeds bad, green weeds good. We already talked about gear. All right, like I said, we're going to burn through the pike. That's what I got for pike. Any questions about pike? Any other questions about pike? Weird specific stuff. Yes?
How do you clean them so that you don't have any bones in them?
That's a really good question. So what I do, I like weird food. We're going to start with that. How many people like pickled fish? Like when you're kind of messed up and it's like 11:30 and there's nothing else in the house and there's like, oh, there's this like jar of fish that somebody gave me. That's what I do with them. So what I do is I cut out that strip of Y bones, and instead of just getting rid of it because it's so full of bones and it sucks, I chunk that up and I brine it, and the pickling solution, the vinegar, dissolves all the bones, and you don't have to deal with it. So you don't waste it. Yep, that's the tricky part. I mean, there's a couple different ways you can kind of hack some meat off of them where it's boneless, but the downside is you're leaving a lot of meat on the fish, which kind of sucks. So that's what I've been doing. So usually when I'm keeping pike, if I'm specifically targeting pike and keeping pike, you know, I'll get a limit. So like go up north, go find a lake up in northern Wisconsin where there's no limits on pike and just load up. But yeah, we'll load up on pike and just clean a whole mess of them so we have enough of those little Y-bone chunks that we can do a batch of pickled fish with them. So that's what I do. Yep, that way you're not wasting stuff. And if you don't like pickled fish, give it to somebody else. Or just ask around, be like, hey, do you want these, like, do you know how to pickle fish? And, you know, yeah, I love pickled fish. Or so-and-so loves pickled fish. Here's a 5-gallon bag full of Y-bone chunks. Have fun. Pickle it. So that's what I do with them. Yep. Yes?
We used to take the little hammerheads
Mm-hmm.
and just flay them out, but run through a meat grinder. Make good fish patties.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
No kidding.
You know, the bones are all ground up.
Sure.
Everything.
Yeah, and when you cook them, they get whatever little pieces get soft. Yeah.
Patties, bread them.
No kidding. So I actually have a buddy that just slabs off the whole fillet and leaves the bones in it, cooks it with like broils it, and then pulls all the bones out when it's done cooking, and then you're good to go. So that's another way you can do it too. You're not going to batter it and have this giant fillet full of batter and bones. Don't do that. But if you like baked fish, broiled fish, that'd be one way to try it. I haven't done that, but I'm going to because it sounds really good. And you don't waste any meat. Just pick all the bones out. Kind of like a salmon or a trout pulling the pin bones out. It's no different. Yeah, that's a great idea. I kind of like fish patties too. That sounds really good. Dang. See, we're all learning stuff. Any other questions? Doesn't have to be pike. Spiritual guidance. Yes.
So when you're fishing a drop-off,
Yep.
so especially on a river channel, do you find the top, the middle, or the bottom, or right at the bottom? Where do you normally find the best fishing?
Yes. Everywhere. So that's the tricky part. That's what's nice about being allowed 3 lines in Wisconsin is you can play around a little. So are you talking open water or ice fishing?
Ice fishing.
Ice fishing. So what I'll usually do if I don't know what the pattern is, if I'm going in totally cold, 1 deep, 1 medium, 1 shallow, typically. Or I'll set, a couple tip-ups and I'll jig somewhere, or I'll hole hop around, but I'll always have a line up shallow, out deep, and somewhere in between, just to play around with it. It does seem like, again, with the crepuscular schedule of things, just being a general theme, it does seem like the shallower stuff is better early and late, and then kind of that transition area is good kind of right after that early bite happens, and then right before that late bite kind of happens. You're kind of cutting them off as they're sliding up, and that's assuming that the fish are in a pattern where they're feeding up shallow. So, yeah. Yes?
What are you using for sonar, and what do you think about live
Ooh,
scope
that's a big question.
technology and
That's a big question.
or is that okay?
So wow. That's the one question I didn't want to get asked. So sonar is a very interesting thing. For ice fishing, I run Humminbird Helix units, just the little Helix 5, Helix 7, 2D regular sonar. You has the flasher mode. You can do all that stuff with it. I do have a live scope. Don't hate me. I've never used it ice fishing, though, funny enough. I got it this spring. I've been playing with it open water. I used it today on the Wisconsin River. It did not help us whatsoever. It was just fun to go, wow, there's a giant ball of shad over there, and run a blade bait through it and snag a shad. And look at that. Is it cheating? It takes a lot of guesswork out of it. I don't know if cheating is the word, but I will say that there are situations where if the situation is conducive for that type of sonar to be effective and you don't have it and you're fishing, let's say in a tournament against somebody who does, you're screwed. You're big time screwed. And I would say the biggest thing that I've learned with it is just watching fish behavior and especially seeing where they are in the water column, which was very interesting. So I primarily used it trolling this year, open water for walleyes, just out in the basin. And it's unbelievably cool how you can point that thing at a 45, 100 feet out off the front of your boat. You can see exactly where the marks are in the water column. And as the boat gets closer, they start diving. And then you see them on your regular sonar and you're like, oh, let's say we're in 25 feet of water. On the 2D sonar, they're down, they're 5 feet off the bottom. They're down 20 feet. But on the live scope, they're only down 7 feet. So now I know instead of staggering all my baits, if I put 6 planer boards out and we're running harnesses, right, or crankbaits or whatever, instead of staggering all those lines and having my outside boards up really high and my inside boards down low, I already know they're all 7 feet down. I'm going to run all my baits 5 to 7 feet down, all 6 of them. And it just takes a lot of guesswork out of it. So is it cheating? Maybe. It makes it a lot easier. The one thing I will say, though, that I think is interesting is there's a lot of people who, this isn't meant to sound mean, but there's a lot of people who know how to fish, who grew up without sonar, who learned how to read water, read conditions, read the wind, read the, what's going on, and actually know how to fish. They don't need that stuff to catch fish, right? And then there's people who have no idea what they're doing. They saw a YouTube video and they're like, I'm going to go buy that thing. And they go spend $5,000 on rods, a live scope, and whatever. And they go out and have a few good days. I actually know, I'm not going to name drop. I know a guy who did that, and he thought he was God's gift to fishing, and I have fished circles around his ass so many times before I got a live scope because he doesn't know how to read the conditions, he doesn't know how to fish. It's this magical box that sometimes lets him get lucky. So you can learn a lot from it, and I would say a lot of the stuff that a lot of us learned over a lot of time on the water can be cut down significantly having that because you're learning so much about fish location and behavior and how they're reacting to your bait. But at the end of the day, there's really no substitute for experience. So the playing field does get leveled at some degree, but there's certain situations where there is an advantage, especially open water. So I'm still on the fence with it, and I use it very sparingly. So, yes?
I like it for ice fishing because you don't have to drill anywhere near as many holes.
Yes.
And that's the big
Right.
advantage I find.
Yeah, you're less searching, less looking.
Yeah,
You pop a hole.
You can do 40 feet.
Yep.
You don't have to
Yeah,
doing that.
exactly. So yeah, especially open water like perch fishing. Being able to pop a hole, look 360 degrees around that hole, out 40, 50, 60, even 100 feet at some time. Mark a pot of fish and then have that X and Y axis that tells you, oh, there's fish 62 feet straight that way. and they're 30 feet down over 70 feet of water. So I'm going to walk my butt 62 feet that way, pop another hole, drop it down, and there should be fish straight underneath me. So it's...
For me, though, then they always end up being 30 feet that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then you still end up popping your giant grid of holes and you're chasing them around all day. That's usually how it goes. But there has been times, in fact, the first time I ever used it was a few years ago with some buddies. Same guy that same guy who bought a live scope. And we were on Petenwell, and we set up on this point that stuck out into the main river channel, and we'd never fished it before. We looked at the map, and we're like, that looks good. I don't know, let's check it out. So we got on the deep side of it, figuring that the fish were probably up on top of this little point, up on this flat, about 12 feet of water, adjacent to about 25 feet of water. They're probably going to be feeding up on that shelf. So we popped a hole, pointed the live scope over there, and we're like, there's 6 of them right there. So we're like, okay, they're 50 feet that way. We walked about, well, my boot, I wear a size 13. I have clown feet. My boot is a foot. So I walked, however many feet it was, got right on top of it, popped a hole, put a flag down, and wasn't in there for probably 30 seconds. Flag went up and caught a walleye. So that felt like cheating. But it was pretty cool. So, I don't know, jury's still out. I have one. I don't use it a lot. When I do use it, it's pretty cool. So I use it a lot salmon fishing. That's cheating. Because I can see my dipsies and my downriggers, and I can see when a fish is coming up. You can almost call the shot. It's freaking hilarious. Like, that one's going to go, and they're like, no way. Boom, dipsy goes off. It's pretty sweet. But at least your bait's in the right depth. That's a big thing with salmon fishing. Water temp and current and all that stuff, there's a lot of variables. So being able to see it and go, oh yeah, like there's fish engaging with what we're doing, it cuts down a lot of time. So very loaded question.
If you guys have other questions for Noah, maybe you can talk to him afterwards.
That's kicking us out.
We should wrap her up. Before we give him a round of applause, I do notice. Wait. He does have cards, and hire him. He obviously knows what he's talking about. So
I am running very limited ice trips this winter because I do have a kid and other stuff that I do in the winter. But if you want to go, give me a shout. We'll figure it out. Make it happen.
Well, let's give him a round of applause.